Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is thrive. And this was a viewer's request, so thank you so much for suggesting this particular verb. Let's look at how we use this verb. The first way you might see or hear the verb thrive used is to mean to grow or develop well or vigorously. And this meaning is most commonly used with babies, children, plants, or animals. And generally, we're talking about something that might be growing a little bit quickly, growing in a strong and productive way. So, this verb has a really positive meaning to it. A second way to use the verb thrive is to describe something that is prospering, and that can mean to be successful. Right? It can also mean to flourish, which is similar to grow. With the second definition, uh, you might see this particular verb used to describe how a company is doing. Is it growing? Is it becoming successful, making a great deal of money? You should know that the verb thrive is a regular verb. To make the progressive form, you're going to drop the E because we have a vowel consonant E word before you add ing. That makes thriving. The past tense and participle forms of this verb can be made by just adding D since this verb already ends in an E. Now our base verb, thrive, ends in a voiced sound. The consonant V sound is voiced. And this means that our ED ending is just going to make a D sound. So I'm not going to add an extra syllable to the word when I make the past tense or participle forms. So the past tense should sound like this: thrived, thrived. Okay. Now let's take a moment and discuss a phrasal verb. You might encounter thrive on, which generally means that someone is doing well in a very particular kind of situation. An example of this might be, do you thrive on deadlines? So here, with this verb, we're asking, do you do well in this type of situation? Some people really do better if they have a specific deadline, be it a date or a time when something must be completed. Without it, right, they might not flourish or be successful. Okay? Not everybody does, but this is just one example of how you might hear thrive on used. Now, let's continue practicing our verb of the day in a couple different verb tenses. Today, we're going to practice the past progressive and the present perfect progressive. Let's start with the past progressive. We use this verb tense to talk about an action that was ongoing during a period in the past. Now, some teachers and textbooks will call this the past continuous, and that's just great. It means exactly the same thing. I like using past progressive because the two P's can help me remember that I need two parts to make my verb. Okay. So my structure here in the affirmative is going to be to start with my subject. Then I'm going to use a past form of be. So that's was or were. And then I use the ing form the verb. So in the past progressive, I need to pay attention to my subject because we have two forms of be in the past. If my subject is I, he, she, or it, I'm going to use was and then that ing form the verb. But if the subject is you, we, or they, we use were, W-E-R-E, and then the ing form of the verb. Let's look at an example sentence. The plant was thriving while I was taking care of it. Okay. So here again, we're talking about the plant growing, looking good, right? Doing well. Maybe I have shared, or I should say, yes, I have shared the plant with someone else, and now it's not doing so well. So the sentence, right? If I'm thinking back in the past for the period of time where I was responsible for it, it was doing okay. Now let's talk about making negative past progressive sentences. To do this, again, I start with my subject, and then I use was or were, whichever form matches that subject, then not, then the ing form the verb. Now you might hear people combine were not or was not into the contractions weren't or wasn't. That's perfectly fine. The meaning is the same. Let's take a look at an example sentence. Employees weren't thriving under his micromanagement. Okay? Maybe you've worked for someone who looks very closely, tells you every little thing to do and how to do it. Some people would use this word, micromanagement. So every little thing is under that person's control. But here we're saying employees were not growing. Maybe they weren't doing good work. They weren't flourishing. Okay? Now let's look at making a yes or no question in the past progressive. To do this, I start with a past form of be, whichever form matches my subject, that subject comes next, and then the ing form the verb. Here's the last past progressive example. Was she thriving at that school? Sometimes you'll hear this word used to describe students who are doing well, performing well. Doesn't mean you have perfect grades, but if you're being involved in other activities, you have friends, generally kind of looking at that whole experience at a particular school. Now let's move on and talk about the present perfect progressive. We use this verb tense to describe actions that started in the past and continue into the present. And some teachers and textbooks, again, will call this the present perfect continuous, and that's just fine. It means exactly the same thing. The reason I say present perfect progressive again and again with my students is that the 3 P's can help you remember you need 3 parts to make your verb. So in the affirmative, we're going to have our subject, then we're going to use a present form of have, so this could be have or has, depending on what that subject is. Then we use the participle been, B-E-E-N, and then the ing form the verb. Okay. So let's quickly review. If our subject is I, you, we, or they, we use have, been, and the ing form the verb. If the subject is he, she, or it, we use has been, and then the ing form. Let's take a look at an example sentence. Big oil companies have been thriving under this administration. Okay. Now, this sentence is not meant to be specific to the United States. I'm sure other countries might be able to identify this, but essentially means the companies are doing well. They're probably making a lot of money. They're growing. They're not having to lay off employees or limit their business in some way. Now let's talk about negative present perfect progressive. To do this, I need to put not after have or has. So the not goes before the been, said another way. Let's take a look at another example. Their plants haven't been thriving since they were moved indoors. Okay. So again, we're back to talking about a plant maybe not growing, maybe not looking so good. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's dying, just that it's not on a kind of upward trend. Finally, let's look at making a yes or no question in the present perfect progressive. To do this, I start with have or has, then I'm going to have my subject, right? Have or has needs to match that subject. Then we use been, and then the ing form the verb. Here's the last example. Has the baby been thriving since the operation? So again, kind of looking back in a certain point in time. So our starting point here, there was some type of operation or surgery. And now from that point into the present, has the baby been growing and doing well, making progress? Okay. Now let's spend a moment looking at some words that are related to our verb thrive. One word you might encounter is the noun thriver. This is generally describing a person or thing that grows or flourishes, right? So is doing well. And I looked for different examples of how this particular noun has been used. And I would say many of the examples focused on situations where something very difficult, very bad happened, and how someone was able to grow and flourish after that. Right now, it could take a long time, but many times there's a difficult, challenging type of situation. So let's take a look at an example sentence here. She just hasn't survived cancer. She is now a thriver who helps others facing the disease. I saw this noun thriver used to describe many people who've had really serious, scary, and possibly deadly diseases. But they've somehow been able, through treatment, medicine, maybe some good luck, been able to kind of get past those very serious illnesses and now are very healthy, they're doing well. And in this case, we're talking about someone who's helping others who have similar types of illness. Another word you might encounter is the adjective thriveless. So this can mean that we're describing a thing, a person or a thing that is not thriving, that is unsuccessful, that doesn't have some type of advantage. Right? So that less suffix, less, generally is used to mean without. So though now, remember we talked about earlier in the video how thrive can have a really positive meaning to it. Thriveless is going to have a really negative meaning to it. Now, this is not an adjective I think you're going to encounter very often. It was more popular a really long time ago, but maybe if you're reading some old literature, you might encounter this adjective. So we'll take a look at one example, and that is if the team does not advance to the playoffs, the whole season will be deemed thriveless. Right? I think more commonly, in a sentence like this, somebody would just say it would be deemed unsuccessful or a disappointment. Those might be some more common or modern ways to use that word. So I hope you feel a little more confident using the verb thrive as you speak and write and communicate with others. Again, one last little tip here. I wouldn't worry so much about using this adjective in your daily communications. Thanks again for recommending this verb. I appreciate everyone who has watched today. Have a wonderful day.